Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast, in which a long-time Agatha Christie collector and her Christie novice husband discuss the works of the Queen of Crime in publication order. In this episode, we take a look at Agatha Christie's third novel and the return of Poirot and Hastings in Murder on the Links.
Welcome to the Chronological Christie podcast. We are your hosts.
Gillian Porter, a long-time Agatha Christie reader and collector.
And her husband, Alan Porter, who after almost 40 years of sharing a house with Agatha Christie books, has decided that he really should read them.
We'll be tackling the books in UK publication order as detailed on the official Agatha Christie website and sharing our thoughts on each from the viewpoint of someone familiar with them
and someone reading them for the first time.
In this episode, we will be taking a look at The Murder on the Links, which was published in 1923. The Evening News paper in the UK at the time offered £500 to serialise Murder on the Links, with which Agatha Christie bought a car, a grey bottle-nosed Morris Cowley, which became her treasure, and it meant that Agatha and Archie were a step closer to her dream of living in the country.
But before we dive into the book itself, we thought it'd be interesting to place it into the context of what was happening in the UK and the world at large at that time. So what was going on in the UK in 1923? Well, it was a royal wedding year. It was the wedding of Prince Albert, the Duke of York, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who would become the future King George VI, the future Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and they were married in Westminster Abbey. For the sporting folks, the original Wembley Stadium in London opened, and I actually lived just down the road from it for a little while I was at college. Opened its doors to the public for the first time in 1923, staging the FA Cup final, that's football or soccer for those non-sporty folks, between Bolton Wanderers and West Ham United. There was a dockers' strike across Britain. The Radio Times is published for the first time, and the Radio Times was originally a radio listing magazine and then became a radio and TV listings magazine that everybody used to buy to see what was on TV in the upcoming week. And what about the rest of the world? Mount Etna erupted in Italy, making 60,000 people homeless. The Hollywood sign was built in California, and it originally read Hollywoodland. The Great Kanto earthquake devastated Tokyo and Yokohama, killing more than 100,000 people. Wow. And in Munich, it was the time of the beer hall push in which Adolf Hitler led his Nazis party in an unsuccessful attempt to overthrow the Bavarian government. It was crushed by police and troops, and 20 people died as a result. Here in the US, prohibition was revoked, but just in New York.
So what was going on with Agatha in 1923? Agatha and Archie had returned from their round-the-world adventure in December 1922 to their daughter Rosalind, who treated them as strangers. Agatha is quoted as saying, "Rosalind treated us, as no doubt we deserved, as strangers with whom she was unacquainted. They were gone for 10 months and she was very little, so it's understandable." Archie's job was not held open, so he had to find work at a time it wasn't easy. He was very unhappy, and that made home life uncomfortable. He had told Agatha when they got married that he wasn't very good when things went wrong, people were sick and that kind of stuff, and this proved to her that he was correct in saying that because he made everybody miserable. He eventually found work, and they were able to start to settle into a routine. Colonel Belcher, leader of the trade mission for the British Empire exhibition that Archie had been part of and Agatha had gone along on the trip, had suggested that she write a novel based on his house called The Mystery of Mill House. And he insisted on being the murderer rather than the victim because he thought that would be more fun. From this conversation, she outlined her next thriller while in South Africa, and she worked hard to finish it when she reached home while dealing with different nannies for Rosalind and not being able to afford a maid to do all the cooking and the cleaning. Before they left on the trip, they had a good nanny and a good maid. when they came back, it made it much more difficult for her to find time to do it while she was managing everything. She was also becoming smarter about dealing with her publishers. Having learned a few things and joining the Authors Society, she managed to acquire a literary agent, Edmund Cork, which began a friendship that lasted over 40 years.
On this podcast, we're talking about plots and stories that range from 50 to just over 100 years old, and in several cases that have been adapted for TV, radio, and movies. But as this podcast demonstrates, people are coming new to the works of Agatha Christie at any time and may not be familiar with all the details of the stories under discussion. So this is a spoiler warning that we will be diving into plot and character details, as well as talking about who done it and why. So if you aren't familiar with the story under discussion, you might want to pause the podcast here and find a copy and give it a read before returning for the discussion. Or you can just keep listening, whether you know the story or not. It's your choice. And with that said, let's dive into The Murder on the Links.
We'll start with a very brief plot synopsis. An urgent cry for help brings Poirot to France, but he arrives too late to save his client, whose brutally stabbed body now lies in a shallow grave on a golf course. Then another body is found, and Poirot has an intriguing case to solve. If you'd like to know more, the book's page on Wikipedia has a more detailed plot description. A link will be in the show notes.
So let's dive into talking about the book, and let's talk about the plot. And we're going to switch up the order around a little bit this time, and Jill's going to go first.
I liked the overall mystery. I felt it was quite clever to involve an old case that Poirot couldn't quite remember, but does some research and realizes that it's important to this case. But there was a little bit too much rushing around, I felt, with Poirot heading off to Paris, then taking Hastings back to England overnight. It was just a bit too much for me that they got a dash here and they got a dash there. And the plot was quite muddled at points. I do have to say that the romance for Hastings was awful. I don't believe in love at first sight. Plus, she was much younger than Hastings, and I found that a little creepy. And the twins thing was rather overplayed. The other thing I thought about was, how would Poirot know? How is he more likely to know what death by an epileptic fit looked like more than a doctor who would have seen those things? I know she does this and he's meant to know a lot, but that little nugget just made me wonder why he would know that. And though most of what I said there was negative, I did like the overall mystery. It had a good pace, I felt, and it flowed quite well for me. What did you think?
Yeah, I liked it. Like you say, I liked the overall idea, but like the first Poirot novel, I felt, again, there's too much crammed in here with the multiple identities. I sort of liked the reference to an old crime, but I thought it was had too heavy an influence on the plot. I would have liked it if there had been little nuggets from an old crime as opposed to somebody almost repeating it exactly, if that makes sense. But
yeah, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, you got the multiple deaths, one of which was pre-planned. That was the twin dilemma of twin switching identities. So I thought it was just too cliche and not really necessary. And again, you got too many people involved in the investigation with conflicting theories. Well, there was Poirot, there was the local French detective, then there was the Sûreté detective. That's three. But then you also had the judge, the doctor. I don't know, there was another French official. There were so many French officials, I was like, which one was who and which one's actually the detective? It sort of got a little confusing.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that one, because if you don't live in France or you've never had experience of how the French justice system works, it is quite hard to follow who all these people are and why they have an importance in the case and why the Sûreté trumped all of them.
While I enjoyed it, I found it a little unsatisfying. It was a nice light read, a little confusing at parts, a little muddled. And like I said, there was a couple of things like the twins thing was like, oh, it's pretty obvious from the start that the twins are mucking about, switching identities. But I didn't enjoy it as much as I did The Mysterious Affair at Styles. It's not to say I didn't like it. I liked it, but not as much. I found The Mysterious Affair at Styles quite a satisfying read. This one, not. I don't think it's one where I'm necessarily going to remember the plot details. If you ask me in 6 months about it, I'm not sure I'm going to remember that much about it.
Okay, I've put that note on my calendar. I will test you in 6 months.
Okay, we'll follow up. So in 6 episodes time, we'll try and come back to that and see if I actually remember it. But one thing I want to talk about, and we talked about this after we both finished reading the book. If the point was that this guy Renaud, or whatever his original name was, sorry, I forgot.
Georges Renaud.
Yeah, thank you. If his point was that he'd been found out and he just wanted to get away, why go to all this elaborate plots of a pre-staged murder and stuff so he would disappear? He had business interests in South America. Nobody knew what he'd done in South America before, other than the fact he'd lived there. Why didn't he and his wife just get on the boat, go to South America, and disappear again?
I know. I didn't understand that.
I know there would have been no book and no story, but from a character point of view, it's like, why are you going to all these? If you've got to disappear, particularly back then, it's easy to disappear. You just go somewhere else and set up a new life. Particularly if you've got the amount of money that they supposedly had. They were supposedly multimillionaires. And he supposedly had all these interests in South America. I mean, he didn't even necessarily need to go back to Chile. He could have gone back to a different part of South America and set up again, because he'd clearly done it once and made a fortune while he was there. So he knows how to do it as well. Overall, the central conceit of the plot just made no sense. It's like, just get on a boat and disappear. And then you wouldn't get killed by trying to stage a murder.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one.
I don't know if that's why I found it unsatisfying, was the actual central conceit that led to the murder just didn't ring true.
Yeah, because you could just run away.
Yeah.
You didn't have to run away at the same time. You could just say, I'm going to go on a trip, and then his wife just leaves one day so that nobody gets suspicious. You didn't have to go through all this. Because they were, in some respects, lucky that the tramp died, because otherwise he'd have been he'd already murdered somebody. So maybe he didn't have quite so many qualms about murdering another person, but it just seemed all rather elaborate when back then it was much easier to start again.
And it was very serendipitous that they had a tramp who had an approximate same size and build to them that they could put his suit on. Just happened to die of an epileptic fit in their garden. So, what a coincidence. So talking of the garden and stuff, what did we think about the setting this time in France?
After feeling really sure about the locations in The Secret Adversary, the locations here were all rather vague again, and I really couldn't get a picture of the layout, especially of where the infamous shed was, where things kept disappearing and reappearing, and the bench, where no one could apparently have a private conversation, even though it was in your own garden. Didn't get a feeling of a place at all from the book. I feel like this is one where I would have liked her to have drawn a map to the relation of the two villas and the golf course, and where the shed was and where the bench was and where the bunker was. I think that would have really helped me out, because it just didn't come alive for me at all in that respect.
Yeah, I think my biggest problem with this one is, why was it set in France? Other than the fact that maybe Agatha Christie wanted to show off that she knew some French and put a lot of French terms in there and showed off how the French legal system worked to a degree. Again, there was an assumption that you knew who all these people were and what their role was. You could have taken this mystery and had it in an English village set next to a golf course. You could have had English detectives in there. There was nothing particularly French about the murder or the people or the reasons behind it. So I think it would have worked just as well, and probably even better, if it had just been set in England.
I agree with you on that, apart from I wonder if, because the original crime was a real one that happened in France, maybe that just put it in her mind, I'm going to set the rest of it in France, because this one was.
I mean, you don't know.
I don't know. I haven't done any research. Maybe I should before we recorded this. Apologies, peeps. But if that was a French crime, maybe that's what centered her on setting it in France.
Yeah, I get that, but you don't have to do that. I mean, I did that with one of my Sherlock Holmes stories. I took a French crime and moved it to England to have Holmes solved.
Yeah, because it is fiction. You can do what you like. Yeah. But I'm just saying that may well have just put it into her head, let's set this one in France.
And again, it was, even though she said it in France, it was sort of a fictitious village, but within a real larger setting, because some of the other towns that she was talking about were like, okay, I know where that is, but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
couldn't place the village, or you say that the way that those villas, these are meant to be large villas. Well, you assume they're large villas because he's got a lot of money, and the other one, she had a lot of money before she frittered it, the next door neighbor. So they've got to be near each other, but they're near each other that people can overhear each other over the fence. And what, yeah, and as you say, where's the golf course in relation to that? I just couldn't get that mental map in
No,
place
me
like you.
either. And that made it hard to follow parts of the story, I think. Because if you're talking about, was it a average sized villa in an average sized garden, or was it a big villa? And if it had a big garden, you'd have to be in a very specific part of the other garden to overhear those conversations. And it happened a little bit too much if they were big gardens.
It happening once in the plot is okay, but it happened at least twice, maybe misremembering, maybe three times, but at least twice in the plot. People just happen to be in exactly the right spot at exactly overhear somebody on the other side of the wall who was in exactly the right spot at exactly the right time, and it was like, okay, yeah. Was I can get away with, two seem to be pushing it a bit far. So
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I agree with that.
all right, talking of pushing things a bit far, let's talk about the characters. I know you have a particular pet peeve around this one.
Oh, Hastings. Hastings really got on my nerves. He was very judgmental and he came across as quite stupid at times. I suppose after years and years of watching the David Suchet Poirot episodes, in that Hastings isn't the smartest chap, but he does have moments of inspiration and he's a generally nice, friendly, kind person. And in this book, it starts on the train and he starts judging this young woman from the beginning just because of the way she's dressed and a word she uses. I don't remember reading much about that in other books. And I know in the books, Hastings doesn't reappear for quite a while. But I was kind of glad because I thought he was a bit judgmental and he was obstructing justice. This whole business, of him falling in love with every pretty girl he sees. But when he does fall, he falls for somebody. He doesn't know her, he doesn't know who she is, doesn't know her name. And it just didn't ring true at all to me. And as I said before, it was creepy because she was a lot younger than him. But on the other hand, Poirot, I felt, was much more rounded in this one. And you can see his character developing. His investigation was interesting. If he thinks something is important and somebody else doesn't, you need to take note that it's important because he doesn't mention things if they're not important. He doesn't do that. I liked the way that he acted as if he was possibly wrong when Giraud, the Sûreté officer, was being an overbearing bully. I liked the way he kind of was like, oh, okay, quietly, because he knew he was right. He didn't feel the need to puff himself up and seem more overimportant than he was. The rest of the characters were fine too. They seemed more rounded than in previous books. The killer's character was very much on the down low. I would have felt there should have been some more intimations about this one because it's almost like she pulled it out of a hat of like getting towards the end. I don't know who's going to be the murderer. I'll put the names in the hat and pull one out. That's a bit like it felt for me. And I didn't like the way Poirot deliberately put Mrs. Raynaud in danger at the end because I knew he felt it was the only way he could expose the murderer. But I just felt that was a bit outrageous. What did you think?
Yeah, I'm going to start with Hastings as well. I know the first book was sort of also narrated by Hastings. It's going to sound funny, but this one felt like Hastings was the narrator. It was very much in your face that this is Hastings telling the story as he sees it. And as you said, it started off with him and the girl on the train, and then it was him. I don't know. I just felt he dominated too much of the narrative. Probably talk about this, but this is like the Holmes-Watson thing of chronicling the great detectives. Hastings was getting in the way of the story he was telling too much, I think. And from my point, and I know we've talked about this, you don't necessarily agree with me, but to me, it came over because it was all about Hastings and his point of view. Poirot was very much a passive observer for the first 2/3 of the story. I don't think he did. The way I was reading it, he wasn't doing much other than standing in the corner of the room or the side of the room, listening to everybody else's conversation. And I know he was picking up clues from that, but he wasn't doing much, the way I read it anyway. But as you said, he did lighten up in this one. He was a much more likable character in this one. He still had those slightly annoying peccadillos that he has. He still came over a little arrogant at times and keeping stuff to himself, but he did lighten up. He was a lot more humorous in this one. I liked his comebacks to Hastings. I laughed out loud when he was measuring the overcoat and for length, and Hastings said, "What are you doing?" And he just said, "I'm measuring the coat," and walked out of the room. And it's like, I don't know, that just made me laugh. I liked his comebacks to that. I liked his comebacks to the annoying French detective Gerard and him constantly referring to the fact that Gerard was scrabbling around on the floor looking for physical clues, while Poirot is just going to stand, look and observe and figure things out, which I suppose goes back to him being a passive observer as opposed to being active. But I guess I can't have it both ways. But I sort of did like the fact he was having this dig of calling Gerard the fox because he was always on the floor scrabbling around looking for stuff. So I think she did a much better job with the characters. I think, again, most of the other characters, I think, were well developed. I thought the son, Jack, was well developed. Mrs. Renault and why she did what she did and why she went along with her husband's plan, I thought was well done. For me, the two that really fell down was the two villains, if you like, the blackmailer next door, Madame, whatever her name was.
Gabriel.
Thank you. And her daughter, who turned out to be the killer. Normally on these, when the killer's revealed, you then think back and say, oh, yeah, there was a clue there. There was a clue here. I should have picked that up. I should have picked this up. I didn't get that this time. It was like, oh, okay, it's her.
Yeah, exactly.
It felt flat. And then I was like, there wasn't anything that sort of pushed me off in a completely different direction to say it could never be her. But there was also I couldn't really think of any clues that made me think, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, it just seemed a thing. And, yeah, going back to Hastings, the falling in love at the first sight of every pretty young girl. And I know we're only 2 books in, but he's already fallen for, what was he? He fell for like at least 2, maybe 3 in the first book. And then and one of whom he proposed marriage to. And then here he's fallen for the pretty young thing on the train that he's never seen, but he can't take his eyes off the girl next door who turns out to be the killer. Yeah, it's just annoying. And I think it was more annoying this time because I said he seemed to be more prominent in the narration this time. It seemed to be more his story than Poirot's.
No, I was going to agree with you. Well, I get that. You have to remember that Poirot's way of investigating is not scrabbling around looking for clues. He uses his little grey cells. Yeah,
I think that's what I meant by I can't have it both ways, because I get that.
He is going to be more passive, so you're going to have to deal with that. Okay, so we get to Alan's favourite word now, the denouement.
So what did you think of the denouement? Been practicing again, another month of practicing.
It was all a bit rushed, I felt like, because if she wasn't, like I said before, she wasn't sure how to end it. Everything wrapped up a bit too neatly. Apparently Poirot can climb trees now. Scrabble, he raced up a tree. This is a guy who doesn't like getting his shoes dirty. That was a bit weird. Where was the gathering of all the suspects to explain the case? I missed out on that too. There was no real face-off with Giraud, which I think was a bit of a shame. He just bought a fox with the money because they'd made that bet. And I found that was a little bit anticlimactic for me.
It's the same things. First off, I loved the fact that Poirot actually used the word denouement, and I bet he had no trouble pronouncing it, but of course he probably did it with a Belgian accent. I agree with you. The reveal, we just talked about it, seemed very clumsy to me. Suddenly putting Mrs. Renault in danger and setting her up as bait, not knowing which room she was in. I mean, that's a completely un-Poirot-like oversight. And I know she made a point about the fact that he felt guilty that he'd not picked up on, or that he hadn't been informed she'd changed rooms. But surely he would have noticed stuff like that she was in a different room.
Well, you'd think, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, again, it just seemed very much out of character for Poirot, that little bit at the end, which put Mrs. Renault in even more danger than she needed to. Of course, the Hastings' girlfriend just happened to be an acrobat, so could swing up the tree and swing into the bedroom window. And then Poirot scampering up a tree behind her was like, really? No. I mean, there was just these little things, and I guess it's probably because it's still early and she's still figuring out who Poirot is and what his character is and what he can and can't do. But when you're looking at it in hindsight as to knowing where the character goes or becomes, it just seems totally out of what we now know as Poirot's character. But she does that make the point, that he is so fussy about his clothes and stuff. You can't imagine him, one, physically doing it, and two, mentally wanting to do it because of what it would do to his clothes.
Being fair, like you said, we know this in hindsight. Yeah. Thinking about what was written in this book and in The Mysterious Affair at Styles, I don't think she's yet got to him being super fussy.
As we go through, that's going to be difficult to disassociate.
Yes, definitely.
I think we both had exactly the what?
Yeah.
Response when we got to that bit. We talked last time about the fact that how they're gathering everybody together and it became the Poirot trademark. And again, probably because this is early, she doesn't use it here. And it just ends up with basically an exposition dump by Poirot to Hastings the following morning after the reveal, telling him everything and how it all worked together. And it's like, oh, that didn't really seem satisfying. And again, I think that was part of my dissatisfaction with it, was where was the big Poirot, let's get everybody in the room scene. And again, this is hindsight. What we know of Poirot from today's point of view, with both all the stories plus the adaptations, is we think of Poirot as wanting an audience. He's actually quite theatrical. Both, I think his look is part of that theatre. He likes to be noticed, and he actually also likes to demonstrate the power of his little grey cells. And he likes an audience. And for him to not do that, again, just seemed out of character. But
agreed.
I think that's hindsight.
Yes, I agree.
All right, let's talk about the writing. What did you think about the way this book was written, Jill?
I think with each book, you can see her writing style developing. And this one, we have a very much clearer version of Poirot. There's still a bit too much information because she's still keeping a lot in there, even though they're relatively short books, quick reads. It was a little clumsy, but still very readable. We've kind of picked it apart a little bit here, but I found it's very easy to read. Flowed nicely, read it in 2 sittings, enjoyed it, but then obviously we just pretty much tore a lot of it apart. So maybe not. I find her book works very readable. They're getting more readable with each book. What did you think?
I will agree. It was readable. I didn't do it in 2 sittings because I sort of it was my sort of nightstand book for a week, half an hour an evening or whatever. So it took a little longer, but I looked forward to getting back into it each evening and seeing how it progressed. So yeah, it was still readable. Like I said, I didn't dislike it. I enjoyed it, not quite so much as the first one. It wasn't quite as satisfying a read, but I did enjoy the experience of reading it. But it's just clearly her doing a Conan Doyle approach. I just mentioned it earlier, with Hastings being Poirot's Watson, or at least trying that approach and seeing how it worked. And it felt a little clumsy. Conan Doyle managed to do it in a way that you knew it was Watson telling the story, but Watson, as narrator, tended to get out of the way. And here, like I said earlier, I felt Hastings got in the way as a narrator. So I felt it was a bit clumsy from that point of view. But she's trying different things out. I mean, we're in the 3rd book and 3 different writing techniques, which is fascinating. As a writing experiment, seeing how she tried to adapt that style to this sort of story, I thought was very, very interesting.
Agreed. I do agree on that.
We've gone through our standard things. I know we both got a couple of things we want to talk about, so I'll let you go first.
Okay, so at the back of the paperback version, which is the William Morrow version that I have and we read, there are 2 little sections at the back, one on creating Poirot, and the second one is Poirot's favorite cases. These were delightful. They were originally printed in the Daily Mail with the serialization of Appointment with Death. I really enjoyed these short essays as she talked about how she creates the character and then what were his favorite cases. And they were a nice little surprise at the end of the book. I don't think, since I've actually bought this book, that I'd reread it because I was replacing one that had fallen apart. I really enjoyed those. I thought they gave you a little bit more insight into her process of creating him and also putting herself in his place of what he felt were his favorite cases. I really liked them. Did you enjoy those?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the first one, the Creating Poirot, having now read all of 2 Poirot stories. But yeah, it was an interesting insight into the creative process and how she came up with the character, just, wandering around seeing all these Belgian refugees and deciding to use that. And I liked the discussion. She got into a fairly detailed discussion about what exactly was the shape of Poirot's head. I described it as egg shape, but which part of the egg is up? Is it the pointy bit or the round bit? And things like that I thought was really interesting and fun. And at this point, you can tell she's very much liking the character. And I don't know when she wrote it, but it was very much liking, sort of enjoying the character. Seems quite fond of him, unlike, as we know later on, when she wasn't quite so fond of him. The second one, to be honest, didn't really mean much because, it was a very short thing of, what were Poirot's favourite cases, but neither of the two I've read were on there. So when it was like, I recognise some of the titles clearly, but I don't know the stories. So it's, I don't know whether that's a good choice or not, because I haven't read them.
Fair enough. I get that, yeah.
I didn't have a context for it, if you like. All right, so there's a couple of things I want to talk about. You've mentioned it a couple of times already, that the flashback crime that they then copycat was based on a real-life French murder case. I was going to ask if you knew more about that, but I didn't actually realize the flashback one was the actual real-life French murder cases. I mean, was it those names, or did she change the names, or do you know?
I don't. I really fell down on that part. I got so busy exploring what she was doing in 1923. I didn't actually look up the case. Okay. Maybe that's something we can do before our next podcast and add a little rider on the bottom. So if anybody knows and they want to let us know, that'd be great too.
Do you know if she used real crime cases as inspiration on a regular basis, or was this like a one-off?
She did to some extent. Not word for word, but I think she picked up ideas and thought, ooh, that would be good to use.
Okay.
Like we all do. Like you and I are writers. We go out and we see things and think, oh, yeah, that'd be interesting.
Writing Sherlock Holmes stories, I deliberately go out and look for period true crime cases from around that time and then think, how can I twist this so it's worthy of Holmes, and how would Holmes solve it? So I just wondered if she'd left notes about, this story was inspired by this case or anything like that.
Probably was. I haven't, because I'm using her autobiography for some notes and quotes for this. I haven't got that far yet, but I think she did. She read a lot. She picked stuff up.
Going back to the first Poirot thing, when I asked about, is there a story about them for, their early time in Belgium? Here, there is clearly a significant amount of time has passed between the mysterious affair at Styles and this one happening. Because early in the book, Poirot, when they're having breakfast or whatever and opening the mail, Poirot and Hastings are talking about various cases. They're like, oh, you remember the so-and-so case or the this and that case? Are those throwaway cases detailed anywhere, or is it again?
No, they're just throwaways. They're just to show time has passed and he's become successful.
Undocumented cases.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. So we talked about the book. Let's dive into the various adaptations and what they were and what did we think of them. One of the first ones we want to talk about is the graphic novel. There is a graphic novel of Murder on the Links released by HarperCollins in July 2007. And it was originally adapted by Francois Rivière and illustrated by Marc Pisky. Apologies for mispronunciation of the names. And it was translated from the French edition, which was published in 2003. Jill, what did you think of this one?
What a mess. To me, it's as if whoever adapted the book read it in sections that were out of order, because it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. In any of the books, I've never, ever heard of Hastings having a mustache, which changed shape over time. His hair was never quite the same. The art, still not to my taste. Characters' faces changed from page to page. And I know that can happen, but it's like, pick a style. It was also a lot more of faces talking rather than seeing too much of a crime scene or an action. There was just a lot of talking faces, and it was hard sometimes to work out who was who because they'd been introduced briefly, but they were either side on or had a hat on, and then I found that made it very difficult to follow. Jacques Renaud looked like a really old, rundown man. He was meant to be very young and vigorous. He was meant to be handsome, and he looked like a very defeated old man in the pictures they had of him. And the original crime, the Baroldi crime, is explained in 2 panels very poorly. In the book, Martha Dubreuil was supposed to be the most beautiful woman that Hastings had ever seen, which is a pretty low bar because he thought most women were beautiful in some way, but I know that. But she looked really ugly and cruel and mean, which was a very odd look to me. And the jumps in the narrative were very odd. At one point, the doctor said the second body was 12 hours old. And later on, Poirot of the balloon head states the body was 24 hours, at least 24 to 48 hours old. They also changed the maid's name in the Renault household and introduced a valet. I know it's an adaptation, but when you're doing a graphic novel to adapt an original novel, surely it makes sense just to pull all those names over, all those characters over. Obviously, I didn't like it. So there's that. What did you think?
Well, I think I enjoyed it more than you did, but it doesn't mean I didn't have problems with it. I have to start with Poirot. The way Poirot was drawn, because all the people in it are normal human proportions. Some of them, as you said, are very inconsistent in the way that details of them change, or it looks like their age changes, Hastings in particular. Jack is looks way older than he is in the book. In fact, everybody seems quite old, the way they're drawn. But they have normal human proportions, except for Poirot, who has this perfectly circular, balloon-shaped head. It's weird.
Very.
Doesn't matter which angle he's drawn from, you cannot take your eyes away from the fact that his head is a completely perfect circle. Nobody has a circular head. So it was a very strange artistic choice. I don't know whether it was done to make Poirot stand out, but Poirot stands out anyway from his stature, his dress, the moustache. He's a very easy character to make visually distinctive. So why they did that, I have no idea, but it's very strange. Anyway, that aside, yeah, I think it was an inconsistent adaptation that takes some fairly major leaps in the narrative. I think they got caught out by the fact that it had to be a certain number of pages. I mean, I know this scripting comics. When I've scripted comics, you only have a set number of pages to tell the story. And it's all too easy to use up your pages way too quickly and suddenly find you're getting towards the end of what you're doing and you don't have many pages left. And I think that's what happened here, because the beginning of the book is full of very dialogue-heavy exposition, which is actually pretty unnecessary to tell the story. They pull in a lot of details from the book, the novel, you don't actually need in a visual environment, because you can use the artwork to make those points. And then it sort of got to the end, and it's like, oh my God, we've still got to do the reveal of, the trap and the reveal of the killer. And it's done in 3 panels. Like, oh, I sort of got the feeling that, it was like, oh my God, we've got like 3 pages left, and we've got to get the rest of the book in. So it went from very heavy, lots of information at the beginning to not a lot of information at the end, and bang, we're done. So yeah, it felt very uneven in that way. I actually enjoyed the artwork slightly more this time than the last time. I think it was more nuanced in the depth in the inking. It gave you a bit more sense of the place. It was inconsistent in the way that people were drawn. Hastings' age on one page towards the end, that last page, like at the beginning of the page, it looked like Hastings was like in his mid-40s. And in the last panel, it looked like he was like 23. Again, slightly weird. For me, the biggest thing about this one is the mysterious pipe smoking guy in the library. There is one panel, folks, when everybody's in the library, when Poirot and the detectives are in the library and they're having a conversation, and for some reason they're in the far side of the room, and front and center of the panel is a guy sat relaxing in an armchair with a half beard who's smoking a pipe. He never appears in any other panel in the graphic novel. And if you look back at the other ones that are set in the library that lead up to that conversation, he's not even in the library. All of a sudden, this guy is in this chair, relaxing, having a smoke while the detectives are having their big conversation in the background. And he never appears again, before or after. It's very weird. So
it is very weird. And you have to give me points here, because I wanted to discuss that. And I thought, no, I saw that in your note. And I thought, no, we're going to go with it. It's very odd. It was very odd.
And you're going to tell me who it is now?
No, I have no idea who it is.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to solve the mystery for me.
No, same as you. I'm like, who's he?
All right. So enough of the graphic novels. Let's talk about the TV. I'm going to hand it over to Jill.
Okay, so the British TV was an adaptation of the novel, was made for a series in Agatha Christie's Poirot. It was broadcast on February 11th, 1996, as episode 3 of season 6 of the show, about halfway through the series as a whole. It was produced by Carnival Films and starred David Suchet as Hercule Poirot and Hugh Fraser as Arthur Hastings. While much of the novel's plot was retained, the adaptation featured several changes, which included the setting being changed to Deauville in France, where filming took place on site. The wager between Poirot and Giraud was changed. Instead of 500 francs, the stakes are Giraud's famous pipe against Poirot's moustache. In the end, Poirot returns the pipe, observing that Giraud will think of him whenever he uses it. Jack is now Paul's stepson, who was adopted by him and took his last name, instead of being his biological son. The denouement is different. Bella is a singer who introduces herself to Hastings as Isabel. She still confuses things by confessing to the crime, but she no longer loves Jack. It is Stoner who shoots Martha with her own gun, when, as Poirot predicts, she breaks in and tries to kill Madame Renaud. Martha's mother does not escape but is arrested. There is no twin sister. Bella is now in love with Hastings, who is staying in Deauville to make sense of it all. Adapter Anthony Horowitz. What did you think, Alan?
Okay, let's start with the positives. Like the earlier Poirot adaptation of The Mysterious Affair at Styles, I think they made some changes which helped to tighten up the story, especially getting rid of the whole twin dilemma angle. I'm there for that. I thought that was really good. I actually preferred the wager here between Poirot and Giraud. Poirot doing a wager for money seems a bit crass for Poirot, but again, that may be hindsight. I like the idea here that the two of them were going to wager something that meant something to each other. You know, the Giraud's iconic pipe against Poirot's moustache, that Poirot would have to shave off his moustache if he lost. I liked that. I thought it was more in character than the money bet that was in the book. I also like the traditional Poirot explains everything in the drawing room scene, which they did here, which she didn't do in the book. And thankfully, we also don't have Poirot scaling any trees at the end. In fact, we didn't have anybody scaling trees at the end. Those for me were the positives. But as a Poirot story, I had several issues with this one. Let's go back to where it takes place. Again, it's set in France. Maybe they're like, oh, we can do this book and we can all go have a holiday in France for a couple of weeks while we film this episode. But story-wise, it didn't need to be in France. And this is a thing that British TV do, which I hate. They have stories that take place in France and everybody is resolutely English, with their accents and their mannerisms. All the French people are played by English actors who are being English. And it was here. The only person in this story who had a French accent was Poirot. And it annoyed the heck out of me. It's like, if you're going to use English actors and not have them play French, but play English and be English, set a story in England. Again, there was no reason for it to be in France, other than the fact the original book was in France. We talked about the villas earlier, and it's one thing the graphic novel got right, and this didn't seem to. The graphic novel, there was very much a difference between the big, posh villa owned by the multimillionaire and the smaller house next door owned by the blackmailer who is supposedly impoverished because she spent all her money from the previous crime and had a smaller house. And it's like, here, it seems to be the other way around. It seems she had the big, grand house with the big extensive gardens, and the multimillionaire who supposedly also owned the big posh hotel on the seafront and the golf course had a much smaller, less impressive house that actually looked overgrown and uncared for. So I don't know, that was just a strange visual for me. And I think most of the casting didn't work either, particularly the actor who plays Giraud, Bill Moody. My apologies, the late Bill Moody, but you were terrible. His delivery was like amateur dramatics night. It was flat, it was monotone. Even when he tried to apply some emotion or emphasis, it just came across as very static, like he was trying too hard to be horrible and overemphasizing the wrong things, and in doing so, almost caricature. I really didn't like the way that was played. I didn't buy the rivalry between him and Poirot for a second. I also think way too many clues and plot points were revealed too early, and others were almost like casually thrown in at the end or even forgotten. For me, the most egregious bit was starting it with a newsreel report of the original crime, which included them taking the actors who played those dual identities later on and putting them in the newsreel. So you knew what these people, you knew the significance of this other crime earlier on because you saw those people being arrested and prosecuting for that crime and getting away with it. And then you cut to the story starts and you see the same guy walk out of the hotel and you're like, well, isn't that the guy who was in the newsreel? So the whole reveal of the double identities later on by Poirot has no significance whatsoever because you already know literally from the beginning of the show. And other things that they did, they showed Jack getting off the train early on. That's, again, meant to be a big reveal that comes about halfway through the story, that he wasn't in Cherbourg, like he said. He'd actually come back and got off the train and was therefore around at the time of the murder. They showed that early on, and it's like, they kept undermining these key plots to the mystery. I thought it was a poor Poirot adaptation. And if you take Poirot out of it and just think of it as a mystery story, I found it was a poorly done telling of a mystery story. And I am staggered that this was adapted by Anthony Horowitz, because I love his work and I admire his work, and he's a great mystery writer, and he knows how to weave a good mystery in both prose and TV. I mean, I love Foyle's War and everything he did in that, and don't think it was a bad episode of it. Like I said, there was some good stuff in here, but overall, I just thought this was a bad adaptation of the story and a badly told mystery story, Poirot or not. And I'll shut up now because clearly I have feelings about this one. Apparently you don't, because there's nothing in the script after your name.
No, I said I have so many feelings. I didn't write any notes. I thought it had much more of a sense of place than the book, although the name of the hotel, Du Golf, was a bit too much on the nose. The bits that annoyed me were things like on their first night in the hotel, Poirot and Hastings are listening to Bella Duveen sing. They both see her, and yet Poirot pretends not to know who she is. There was obviously a point to it, but that point never really came up. I did like the fact that even though she introduced herself to Hastings as Isabel as opposed to Bella, that they had more time together to build more of a relationship. And she didn't look that much younger than him. They seemed to have a lot in common. They had good conversations when they went out to dinner, lunch and that. It kind of made more sense that he would fall in love with her rather than just because he saw her once on a train. I liked that part. I liked the setting. Again, the giving it place, that it was obviously it was a resort place. But again, it still didn't cover that whole, how they could overhear the conversations between the two villas, where the shed was in relation to that, and the bench, and the golf course never really came quite together for me. I did like the way they had Hastings play golf with 3 other people. He's obviously not very good. That was quite funny. And that they led into that of finding a body and pulling them in that way. Overall, I didn't hate it as much as you did, obviously, but I was annoyed when they played that reel at the beginning. I just didn't see a point. And like you, I really like Anthony Horowitz's work. I read most of his books, watched the TV shows. I enjoy his work. So I was quite surprised he would do something like that. And again, I was really annoyed about the knives, because there was a whole point about the knife disappearing and reappearing that was quite pivotal to the story. And they kind of just, threw, there's more than one knife, And that should have been a big deal, because Madame Renaud has one, Martha has one, Bella had one. It should have been more bigger part of the story. So I was a bit puzzled by that. I liked that the wager was about something that was important to both of them rather than money. I thought that was a really good addition. I find it more watchable than you do. I can watch it and get rid of those. It's not one I rewatch very often. Let's put it that way. There are others in the series that I do like to rewatch. This is not one of them.
Well, talking of not watching things, there were several other adaptations that we did not get around to watching because basically we don't speak Japanese. So yes, there was a Japanese TV adaptation. I'm going to absolutely butcher this. My apologies. The Second Night of Mitani Akufa Takashi, a 2-night show that was done in December 2005. There was an adaptation of The Murder on the Links. The first night was the ABC murders, and then the second night was The Murder on the Links. And the show starred Shihiro Ito as Takashi Akuhuba, who represents the character of Poirot. Interesting. I would love to actually try and find copies of that. That might be interesting to watch. I'm talking to France. French TV, the 7th episode of the 2nd season of the French television series Les Petites Meurtres de Agatha Christie was an adaptation of this novel, and it aired in 2014. There is also a stage show. The Murder on the Links was adapted for the stage by the American playwright Stephen Dietz in 2021. and performed by an ensemble cast of 6, with Poirot and Hastings played by either male or female actors. And it's a sort of serious/comic adaptation, and it supposedly premiered in San Diego in 2023. So I wonder if that will turn up somewhere close to us at some point. It would be fun to go see. And on radio, there was a Murder on the Links was presented as a 1-hour, 30-minute radio adaptation on Saturday Night Theatres on BBC Radio 4 on the 15th of September 1990. And it was repeated on the 8th of July 1991 and again in 2015.
Okay, now we reach my favorite quote. I don't know how much a lot of our listeners know about Agatha Christie, but she was pretty famous for not liking a lot of the covers that were made of the books. She was not happy with the cover design of this book at all. And she fought Bodley Head, her publishers, about having more control in the future. And she said, "There was a good deal of bad feeling over this, but I was really furious, and it was agreed that in future I should at least see the jacket first and approve of it."
Welcome to the world of publishing, Agatha. You very rarely get much say in what you, with a traditional publisher, you very rarely get much say in what the cover to your book's going to look like.
Oh, she made sure she did. As she got more famous, she had more control. She moved publishers, and with having a literary agent, I think that helped. There were still a few that are pretty egregious, but she did in the end have much more control over what they looked like.
Do you know what that first cover design was that she objected to?
Yes, we actually have a picture of it. It's a picture of a dagger stabbing a photograph with a golf ball and some golf picks by it. I think that's the one. Or it might be one that just has a golf club on it. I'm not sure of them just looking quickly at the pictures, because we have copies of at least 4 or 5. But I think it was that first one. She just didn't like it.
Doesn't really matter. I was just curious. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Chronological Christie podcast. If you would like to leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. If you'd like to discuss any aspect of this episode, you can message us on the Chronological Christie Instagram account. And thanks for those few folks who've already done it. A link for which will be in the show notes, or you can find us on social media. Jill, where can they find you?
I can be found on the Chronological Christie Instagram account. Looking forward to meeting you there.
And I can be found on most social platforms by searching for @AlanJPorter or via my author's website at alanjporter.com. And if you want to keep up with my various writing projects, you can sign up for my free weekly newsletter at alanjporter.substack.com.
The books discussed on this podcast can be found on a dedicated Chronological Christie section of our online bookstore at bookshop.org. The link will be in the show notes. Please join us for our next episode, where we'll be discussing The Man in the Brown Suit. We look forward to you joining us.
The music used in this episode was extracted from the public domain recording of I'm Somebody Somebody Now by the Joe Venuti Orchestra. The Chronological Christie podcast is a production of Megrin Entertainment, a division of 4J's Group, LLC.